Few movie monsters loom as large as Mary Shelley's creation in Frankenstein. Last week, we did a really in depth dive into some of its themes, and to prepare for that, I didn't only read the original novel and put on a few YouTube videos. No, I put on every Frankenstein feature film I could get my hands on. So, building up to Guillermo del Toro's new adaptation, we are going to go over it all in the upcoming weeks. This week, we are just looking at perhaps the most influential of them all, Universal's Frankenstein series of films. From 1931 to 1999? That can't be right. Wait, it is? Okay, let's see what that's about. From 1931, these movies gave us some of the most iconic horror images in cinema history. Today, we are going to go through each of Universal Studios' Frankenstein movies, from forgotten sequels to comedic takes. Let's see where Universal's monster shines and where he stumbles, sometimes into quicksand. While James Whale's 1931 Frankenstein isn't the first adaptation, it is the one that would define the creature. Colin Clive as Henry Frankenstein, not Victor here, steals the show entirely, really embodying both the manic brilliance and crippling obsession of the tragic doctor. Boris Karloff's creature really needs no introduction, I am sure, although he is no poet like in Shelley's novel. The entirely silent sequences do feel awkward, a relic of the transition to sound, but Karloff's haunting presence fills the hollow. I find the lack of score honestly to mostly work in the film's favor. It makes it stand out that much more and heightens that gothic atmosphere that I adore. Far more than just a monster movie, this is a tragedy of the Doctor's hubris. It laid the groundwork for the mad scientist subgenre, and even the sequel gets to flesh out the monster. Easy S tier, especially paired with the next movie. 1935's Bride of Frankenstein is that rare sequel that doesn't just hold up, but entirely overtakes the original. As far as I am concerned, Whale is the most subversive director of his time, fusing a little bit of his queer camp with gothic horror, giving the creature a voice that also gives the film heart. Watching him long for company really becomes devastating. The entirely original Dr. Pretorius steals the show, though, as an even more mad and extremely flamboyant scientist. While the titular bride's appearance may be quick, he is cemented as an icon, unlike virtually any other monster to come out of a Universal Monster sequel. Because this doesn't feel like a sequel, it feels very deliberate and polished, and so thematically rich. It manages to have a dark sense of humor while never losing its themes of loneliness and rejection. If you could only watch one Frankenstein movie, tell that person to fuck off and double feature these two because it's probably most people's route. Another easy S tier. 1939's Son of Frankenstein is, I think, the first Frankenstein movie that doesn't base its narrative on the original book at all. Harloff returns for his final go at the creature, although he loses all the depth he earned in Bride, which is never not disappointing for me. A Generations, Sherlock Holmes plays the titular son of Frankenstein, trying and failing to escape the family's curse of hubris. Bela Lugosi is the standout, though, as the now nearly as famous as the story he was added to retroactively Igor, with a Y, though. The broken necked, scheming little bastard who really earns his keep. It does not have the elegance of the whale movies, but it is. We are moving from being a movie about morality and science to something more about inheritance and guilt here. This is a really strong entry that feels like the start of the monster showdowns that focus on spectacle, though. I get this is a lot of people's favorite in the fan base, but it is still just an A tier for me. Franchise has switched entirely to a monster adventure series in 1942's Ghost of Frankenstein. By this point, Lon Chaney Jr. has replaced Karloff for the first time, waving away the change by just not mentioning it, as Igor returns to also just really give the middle finger to the continuity. But the presence he brings and the dynamic he has with Lon Chaney is a real highlight. To me, Igor has this really warped sincerity that is tragic, revolving around brain swapping that pushes this series into full camp. While the monster is less grounded, there is more than enough tragedy in the plight of these characters to hold interest. It is far more pulp than poetry, but it is still fun pulp. Another A tier for me as far as I am concerned. Now, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman from 1943 is way more of a Wolfman sequel featuring Frankenstein's monster. Although Lon Chaney does really shine as the Wolfman, as he usually does. Much to my dismay, though, Bela Lugosi's Frankenstein monster is really sidelined, robbed of any possible depth he might have when his dialogue was just cut out completely. And with this loss of dialogue came the loss of an explanation of why the monster was blind and stumbling about. What could have been a great mashup is way too lopsided. Chaney carries most of the dramatic weight while the monster just kind of shuffles around in the background. The set pieces are great though, and the final monster battle does deliver on that movie title. This movie feels like it could have been an A tier, but I can't give it higher than a C. So what happens when you try to speedrun three monsters and cram The Hunchback into a single movie? You get 1944's House of Frankenstein, a monster rumble that feels like four half-finished scripts were stitched together like the monster. It is really awesome that Boris Karloff returns in the capacity of a scientist. Dracula pops in and out before he meets literally anyone, and the Wolfman is again forced to become the tragic and only interesting subplot of the movie. Boris Karloff's most famous role, though, is used a little more than a prop narratively, stumbling into one of the least satisfying endings in a franchise that reuses its own endings. This is a really frustrating watch, D tier. 1945's House of Dracula was marketed as another Grand Monster crossover event, but it barely features the monster. And to be fair, it is not included in the Frankenstein box set, it's in the Dracula box set. The monster only shows up in the final act, waking up just long enough to wreck shop before being shoved aside. A lot of this movie is focused on Dracula, the most famous vampire of all time, seeking a cure for his illness, which I never liked. While the Wolfman does the same, but that is way more expected. The new Doctor is also a legally distinct Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde because sure, why not? Universal should have known how to effectively juggle their monsters by now. It is really disappointing. In the context of Frankenstein and in general, I gotta give this a D tier. Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. See, I knew they had it in them. This is a proper monster mash. Bud Abbott and Lou Costello's horror comedy really revitalizes these horror monsters by letting the monsters be their monster selves while the comedians lean into their own strengths. I will always be a fan of Costello, my favorite bumbling doof as he bumps into Universal's big three monsters. Lon Chaney Jr. continues to do his Wolfman thing. This is the one time we got a proper return of Bela Lugosi as Dracula. The creature, though, is still more like the sequels, being more tool than character. It is a hard balance to manage, but this one does it pretty well. I'm sure it's an S tier for lots of people, but is not my favorite Abbott and Costello movie. It is not even my favorite of their monster interaction, so this is only going to A tier for me. But it's a great A tier. Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet Frankenstein from 1999. Yes, this is an officially released Universal film that features the classic Frankenstein monster. And yes, it is weirdly charming about the chipmunks accidentally befriending the creature. Here, affectionately called Frankie at a theme park where, for whatever reason, the real Dr. Frankenstein works as a horror consultant. The animation is serviceable as a Saturday morning special, but the real draw for me is the version of the creature. Frankie is way more lovable and misunderstood than feared here. A companion to the Chipmunks, even. The songs are but I'm also like 32. They're not made for me. But this does reek of all its cozy Halloween vibes all the same. I don't care if the logic is nonsense, and while I do care that Dave is the worst guardian since Goku, but that is par on the course with the Chipmunks as far as I know. This is a great lowball introduction to Frankenstein for the small children, and works surprisingly well. It keeps the monster sympathetic, it's soft, it's perfectly goofy. Nestle this into the B tier. And there you go, from gothic horror to slapstick comedy to children's cartoon. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein has already been reshaped and repurposed 10 times over, and we are not anywhere near done yet. Next weekend, we are looking into Hammer Productions' Frankenstein series before we start picking things a little more at random. So do what you can to keep your brain in order and remember to come back around.